All right. Hey there, everybody. This is your module 1 lecture, mini lecture, for chapters 1 through 4 for HDEV 348, child development. So give me just a second. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, so what's going to happen here is I'm sharing my screen with PowerPoint notes on it. The PowerPoints are the exact same ones that you have on the Canvas page. So I do encourage you to read through them, make sure that you are understanding the course material. I'm going to go through these quickly. There's a lot of information, but just to kind of give you a general overview of where the chapters are going. So let's kind of start out here. And I apologize, I see my slides are moving very slow. I am not going to lecture on every slide. I can't do that. We would have about 15 hours of lecture video, and no one's going to listen to all that. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of each chapter and kind of where it's going, what it's doing, and hopefully this will give you a little more direction on the chapter. So this first chapter is a general chapter, and it really just looks at the overview of children and child development. It talks about, what development is. It talks about, obviously, how we improve the lives of children, etc. So it's going to look at some things in the sociocultural context. So this, as you're getting into this class, understand that we're going to look at not only individual things like the child themselves, but also the things around them. So, what is the context of where the child is living? What is the child's culture, the child's ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their gender. Now, let me apologize to you. This chapter, this textbook is still very, very 2-category gender. I absolutely recognize the gender fluidity, LGBTQ plus information. This textbook is just looking at it in 2 categories, male, female. So please don't take offense at that. It's the way that the textbook is. So when we're looking at kids, again, we look at their resilience and how they get through things, how they are able to handle situations and things. It talks about what makes resilient children. And, it also gets into social policy and some of the things that affect the development of children. It gets into then areas of biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional processes. And, we look at these as the domains of development, where we see development. And if you look at your textbook, we are going to look at the biological or physical, cognitive, and social emotional processes at every age group. So your domains of development are these biological, the cognitive, and the socio-emotional. They are all separate processes, but then they all interact with each other. The biological very much influences cognitive and social emotional. The social emotional, it affects the other things. They all have an effect on each other. So those are your domains of development. Now we're going to look at periods of development. And this is different than when we're talking about pregnancy. This is general periods of development. We look at the prenatal time from the time of conception until birth. That's the prenatal time. And then we're going to look at infancy, early childhood, and then into middle and late childhood. Now, this textbook goes into adolescence. And, when I'm looking at child development, I tend to stop this class before adolescence because adolescent development is a whole separate thing. And quite honestly, adolescent psych is a whole separate class. So we stop this class at the end of middle and late childhood. So when we are going through this semester, you're first going to talk about the prenatal period. Then you're going to learn about infancy and toddlerhood from birth to about 18 to 24 months of age. Then you're going to look at early childhood and the physical, cognitive, and social emotional processes in that age group. And then middle and late childhood, the physical, cognitive, and social emotional processes in those ages. So, that's how your textbook is arranged. And so we're always going to look at all three of these domains of development in all of those ages. Okay. So there's other things in here about nature versus nurture. We look at continuity versus discontinuity. Continuity, is it a continuous development? Discontinuity, is it in distinct stages? Many of your theorists are going to talk about discontinuity, that their theories are discontinuous, that their theories are in stages. And then the end of your book just goes into the importance of research. It goes into scientific method. It goes into a little bit about that. The very end of this chapter. So this is why I'm not lecturing on every slide. There are 59 PowerPoint slides in your first chapter. Yes, I said 59. We're not going to go through everything. What the end of this is doing is giving you a summary of the major theories that we will talk about this semester. So the first one is Freud, and they're looking at the developmental theories. So we're going to look at Freud's oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages from birth to, puberty and onward. We're going to talk about Erikson. We're going to talk about Erikson trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, and industry versus inferiority. We might touch a little teeny tiny bit on identity, but not a lot of that. Those are psychoanalytic theories. So there are some good things about them and some criticisms about them. Your cognitive theories. Biggest one is, of course, going to be Piaget, who looks at development from the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational, the concrete operational, and the formal operational stage. Now, I will have some, some theories or some videos up there for you. I'm just making myself a note right now to kind of help with those, just understanding those. Okay, there's also Vygotsky. Vygotsky is a very involved theorist that we'll talk about a little bit later, that looks at the ideas of scaffolding, the ideas of helping children develop their zone of proximal development. Information processing, which tends to be a little more computery, but it does have some good information about memory. So those are your cognitive theories. Your behavioral, so go back to Intro to Psych with Ivan Pavlov. With B.F. Skinner, we've got classical and operant conditioning. We talk about Albert Bandura and social learning, social cognitive theory. And really, your cognitive theorists are looking at how your brain processes information. So those are some evaluations then on the cognitive theories. Then we get into what we call ethology or ethological, as well as ecological. One of the bigger ones in here is Yuri Bronfenbrenner. Now, one of the things I wish they wouldn't do, I wish they wouldn't put Bowlby in with this. I wish that they would put Bowlby back in with Freud and Erikson in the psychoanalytic. But it is what it is. He's in this section. Bronfenbrenner looks at the child or the individual and the things in their microsystem that affect them, their family, their school, their neighborhood, and how all those things in the microsystem interact in the mesosystem and the exosystem. What are the things that are outside of the child, the mass media, social welfare, etc. How do those interact in the mesosystem to affect the child? And then the chronosystem, of course, is bigger things outside of them as well, and how all those affect the child. So this kind of puts together, and I noticed that they, oh, that's nice. So they tell you John Bowlby, but they don't give you John Bowlby. Bowlby is going to talk about attachment from the perspective of pre-attachment, attachment in the making, clear-cut attachment, and reciprocal relationship, looking at how we build bonds with each other. And then we get into eclectic, which, yeah, whatever, they're kind of out there. But the biggest thing in this chapter is very overwhelming because it has all of the theorists in there Don't sit down and try to memorize all of those. You have a general idea, but we're going to come back to every single one of those theories throughout the semester. And then the very end, of course, is just talking again about basic research design, research challenges, stuff that you have all had if you've had intro to psych. And you guys that are in, and you guys in this class have also had lifespan. So a lot of this is review for you, which is why I'm not going to go into a ton. You guys have the prereq of psych and lifespan development. So yes, this is the same stuff, only much more specific. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go over this in a major detail. Your chapter 2 is your biological beginnings. Now this might start to sound familiar. I will tell you that the very beginning of this textbook and this class is the very beginning. Well, this whole class is the very beginning of lifespan class. So when you took human development, this whole class is the beginning 8 or 9 chapters of lifespan. So if you did really well in that class, you're going to do just fine in here. This is a little more detail on things that we talked about in Human Development 215, but it's the same stuff. So again, I'm not going to go into great detail about all this. Chapter 2 is the biological beginnings. And, quite honestly, it goes through the same things. You guys that took lifespan development from me, this is the same textbook author. Things are going to look very similar to you. The smart books are going to be very similar and very familiar to you. There's more detail about things that we talked about in lifespan, but it's the same stuff. It's the same author. Sorry, I'm taking water and drinking water as I'm talking. Okay, so 2 is just your biological perspective. And again, this gets into information about Darwin and evolution and, just how things have developed. We go back over chromosomes, DNA, and genes, which again, all of this you had in lifespan. We talk about the collaborative gene. Actually, I think even some of these slides are exactly the same. Remember, we talked about the genetic difference between males and females, XY and XX, with, XY being the male, XX being a female. We talked about back then variability, looking at twins, and how those things happen. The genotype and the phenotype, what do we see versus, the genotype, what is their genetic makeup? The phenotype, what do we see? And again, some just basics about genetics. Those of you that love science, don't go crazy. It's a very, very basic genetics section there. Again, some abnormalities in chromosomes, some different syndromes that happen. Again, your prenatal diagnostic test. There's just a lot of basic information in here. And again, you've had all this in lifespan, so I'm not going to go over every slide. Chapter 3 is getting into, again, your prenatal development. And again, quite honestly, this is a very similar chapter to what you had in lifespan. Again, it talks about pregnancy being about 266 very long days, divided into the germinal, embryonic, and fetal period. Remember, don't mess those up. Don't get those confused. We're looking at the prenatal development, okay, that the development prenatally is about 266 days. And it's these 3 prenatal periods: germinal, embryonic, and fetal, with the germinal period being the very beginning, about 2 weeks, okay, and how all of that pregnancy happens. And then the embryonic period being about 2 to 8 weeks after conception. Okay, and talking about the layers of cells. And then the fetal period being about, they say 2 months, you really should go in weeks. So 8 or 9 weeks until the end of the pregnancy. Okay, those fetal, embryonic, or excuse me, germinal, embryonic, and fetal are stages of prenatal development. They are different. Whoops, let me get down here. Okay, they are different than looking at the trimesters of pregnancy. This is the embryonic, the germinal, embryonic, and fetal are talking about prenatal development of the specific development of the developing fetus. This is looking at the whole pregnancy. So this is looking at conception through, it's actually through 16 weeks, is the first trimester, up to 16 weeks, excuse me. The second is 16 to about 27 weeks. And then 28 weeks and on is the third trimester of pregnancy. Okay. So when we're talking about what is going on with the developing baby, but it's talking about how things are divided out in pregnancy, and how, what's happening with the developing fetus as far as the pregnancy is concerned. And then again, just some information on the brain, the neural tube defects that can happen. Let's see. Talking about prenatal care and teratogens, again, are a big area. Remember, you've seen this slide before. Looking at those things in the environment that can be damaging. So those are teratogens. Again, your incompatible blood type, talking about, if mom and baby have incompatible blood types with that Rh factor. Looking at, again, prescription, non-prescription drugs and psychoactive drugs and the effects on the baby. So, this should all be very familiar to you from your lifespan development class, even if you didn't take it here. And then your last chapter is chapter 4 is the birth chapter. Just talking about the stages of birth, that there are 3 stages, how that all happens. And yeah, that's how it happens. Again, looking at childbirth settings, looking at APGAR scale, looking at 1 minute and 5 minutes of life and 10 minutes if needed. What was baby doing? The APGAR scale again is that they check heart rate, respiratory effort, muscle tone, body color, and reflexes at 1 minute of life and then at 5 minutes of life. If baby had a rough entry into the world, they may then check it at 10 minutes of life. But you get a score. You get a score for heart rate. Is the heart rate absent? Is it less than 100 or is it fast? And you give it a number. A good APGAR score is 7. Not so good is 4. Really bad is 0. It is possible for a baby to be born with a 0 and need resuscitation. So just some other things in here that you can read about. And again, I hate to repeat myself over and over, but if you have lifespan development from me, this is all review. Even if you didn't have it from me, it should in general be review for you, because it pretty much all the all the lifespan textbooks are pretty much the same. Remember kangaroo care, that's that skin to skin contact that helps especially newborn babies grow and develop. A little bit about postpartum depression, looking at emotional adjustments, but also psychological. Talks about bonding, although it does not go into information about John Bowlby yet, but it will. So there you go. So that's the 4th chapter. So again, if you were in my lifespan class, even those slides should be familiar. Your smart book should be fairly familiar. I will do a mini lecture like this for each section. Some will be a little bit more detailed than others. This beginning section is very much review, and it's very general. When we get into some of the other chapters, I might only hit 1 chapter or 2, or I might only hit a couple of big things. It just depends, but certainly if you need more than what this video has given you, please reach out. I'm happy to help you through whatever it is you might be confused on. So that's the end of this first mini lecture. So hopefully you found it helpful. Have a great day.